What if I told you someone granted refugee status today might not be allowed to settle permanently for 2 decades? That's not a plot from a dystopian drama. It's a policy the government has just put on the table. In this video, we'll break down what the proposed reforms actually say, who they affect, why ministers argue for them, and what experts and refugee groups are warning could happen next. On 17th November, the Home Secretary set out a major overhaul of the asylum and return system. The centerpiece is a shift from the current model where refugees can apply for indefinite leave to remain, that is the permanent settlement after 5 years, to a system in which refugee protection becomes effectively temporary and people may have to wait up to 20 years before becoming eligible to settle permanently. In the meantime, refugee leave would be granted in short chunks, 30 months at a time, requiring repeated renewals. The government's policy paper and common statements make this change explicit. Why this matters? Under existing rules, successful asylum claims usually lead to a 5-year route to settlement and later eligibility for citizenship. The new plan removes that direct route from the core protection part and replaces it with repeatable short-term protection. Reuters and other major outlets describe the move as quadrupling the wait for settlement and calling it the biggest change in the modern time. Here's the practical picture the government is proposing. The first one is initial leave shortened. Refugee status will be granted for 30 months, which is 2.5 years, instead of 5. After each period, people must reapply to extend their leave. The second is no route to settlement for 20 years. Refugees in the core protection route would not be able to apply for indefinite leave to remain until they have been in the UK for 20 years unless they switch into other permitted routes, for example, work to study routes that offer a different pathway. And the third is conditional support. Rights such as housing and financial support could be made discretionary rather than automatic. People with the right to work could lose support. This is not just a longer wait, it's a change from a route that led to stability to one that keeps people in repeated short-term limbo. Minister argued the asylum system is out of control and that the reform are needed to deter irregular migration, reduce the numbers arriving by small boats, and to restore public confidence. The Home Office says temporary protection with review will make the system more flexible and ensure people are returned if their country becomes safe again. They also point to other countries. Denmark is referenced in the policy paper as examples of tougher time-limited protection models. If these reforms go ahead, the effects are immediate and layered. Longer uncertainty for refugees. Instead of being able to plan a life after 5 years, families may face repeated immigration checks and the stress of renewals for decades. That can mean difficulty renting, opening long-term bank accounts, accessing stable employment, and being unable to plan family life. Advocacy groups warn this creates decades of limbo, pressure on public services and charities, short-term leaves and discretionary support could push more people into destitution if support is withdrawn, increasing pressure on charities and local authorities. Barriers to integration, frequent renewals discourage investment in local communities. The very thing governments often say they want: language, learning, work, and civil participation. The uncertainty may also traumatize children who grow up with constantly changing legal status. Who is this likely to be affected? The reforms primarily target people who come through the asylum process, including those who arrive irregularly. Ministers have suggested different rules would apply depending on how someone arrived and whether they have means to return home or to integrate via work and study routes. Government briefings indicate some groups could still access quicker settlements if they move into the alternative routes. For example, skilled worker or sponsored study. But for many refugees, the 20-year rule would apply. Let's look at supporters' view. Supporters say these changes will deter dangerous journeys, reduce factors, and give the state more control. They argue that if refugee status is truly temporary and conditions in the home country improve, people should be returned rather than settle permanently. Looking at the critics' view, humanitarian organizations, refugee charities, and many legal experts say the policies are punitive and risk creating prolonged exclusion. They warn of increased destitution, family separation, and legal complexity, and that repeated renewals will create a far more expensive and bureaucratic system. NGOs and campaign groups describe the proposal as likely to traumatize already vulnerable people and to undermine integration. The proposal has prompted debate about the UK compliance with international refugee and human rights obligations. Some critics fear the changes could prompt legal challenges, especially where family reunification is limited or rights are curtailed. The policy paper signal an intent to tighten human rights arguments in appeal, which could itself be a subject for judicial review and parliamentary scrutiny. Right now, these proposals are set out in a government statement and policy paper. Next steps typically include consultation, potential amendments, impact assessments, and if the government pursues primary legislation, parliamentary debate. That means the final legal framework could differ from what's been announced today. However, media coverage and government briefing suggest ministers are committed to radical change. Watch for consultation and specific drafts of legislation where exact wording and exceptions will matter. If you are moved by the changes and want to help, support refugee charities and local groups working on housing and legal advice. Follow the consultation process. Responses from civil society often feed into parliamentary scrutiny. Contact your MP if you believe the reforms are too harsh. MPs receive constituent feedback and can raise issues in parliament. So, in short, the government is proposing to turn refugee status into a long-term temporary agreement with the possibility of a 20-year wait before permanent settlement. That's a seismic shift in how the state treats people fleeing persecution with big human, legal, and social consequences. I'll keep tracking official documents and major reactions, but if you found this video useful, hit like, subscribe, and share, and tell me in the comments what question you want answered next.